Hi guys. Imagine a Roman emperor so powerful, he believed he could rewrite love itself. When Nero's young wife died, he couldn't let her go. So he found a boy who looked just like her, had him castrated, dressed him in her clothes, and made him live as her replacement. The boy's name was Sporus, and what followed was one of the strangest, darkest love stories in Roman history. Was it obsession, grief, madness, or the ultimate example of an emperor whose power had no limits, not even over another person's body? Tell me what time you're watching this. Morning, night, or somewhere in between. And if you like history that doesn't flinch from the uncomfortable parts, hit subscribe. No pressure, but the next story is even more unsettling. You don't start this story in gold or glory. You start it in silence. Picture the marble corridors of Nero's palace, where even the wind seems afraid to breathe too loudly. A man who once filled amphitheaters with music now sits in the dark, staring at an empty couch. His wife, Poppaea Sabina, is gone. The woman who bathed in milk, who rode in silver chariots pulled by mules with gilded hooves, who once called herself divine, now lies beneath a slab of white stone. And Nero, emperor of Rome, refuses to believe the gods would take what was his. You can almost smell the place: incense, wilted roses, the faint sweetness of decay masked by perfume. Servants whisper in corners, wondering if grief can turn a god mad. You see Nero pacing, hands shaking, muttering to himself, sometimes cursing, sometimes weeping, sometimes rehearsing lines as if life were still a stage. He wasn't always like this. Once he was charming, even likable in a strange, spoiled way. He recited poetry, played the lyre, and thought he could make Rome sing with him. But the death of Poppaea tore something out of him, and he decided to stitch that missing piece back together with anything he could find, no matter how unnatural. The story says he kicked her to death during a quarrel, though official scrolls turned that line into a whisper. She died suddenly, they say, while expecting a child. Some called it an accident. Some said it was fate. But behind those palace doors, you can almost hear the slap, the gasp, the terrible silence afterward. Imagine the guilt or the denial that followed. Nero built shrines for her, statues, coins stamped with her face. He even called her Divine Poppaea and made priests burn incense in her name. You'd think the marble would have comforted him. But marble is cold. When night falls, Nero sits at her dressing table. Her jewelry still lies scattered there. Amber combs, ivory hairpins, little bottles of myrrh. He picks one up and smells it, eyes wide and glassy. She's still here, he tells himself. She's still here. But every perfume fades eventually, doesn't it? Even emperors can't bottle love forever. Outside, Rome continues, as Rome always does. Loud, hungry, unbothered by personal tragedy. Senators plot, actors perform, bakers shout prices. Life marches on, indifferent. That's what eats Nero alive. The city that cheered for him yesterday now yawns at his sorrow. So, he begins to imagine a way to make Poppaea's presence tangible again. He doesn't know it yet, but this will be the seed of his most disturbing creation. You wonder, what makes a person powerful enough to command the world, yet powerless before a single ghost? Maybe you've seen it before, in smaller ways. Someone clinging to a past love, scrolling through old photos, trying to speak to a memory that no longer answers. Nero just had more resources, more delusion, and a terrifying stage to play on. He starts holding midnight performances for no audience but himself. He sings her favorite songs to the ceiling. He orders dancers to reenact their wedding. He makes chefs recreate the exact meal they shared on her last birthday, and then stares at the uneaten food until dawn. Rome's palace has seen decadence before, but this feels different. It isn't luxury anymore. It's lunacy draped in silk. His courtiers try to comfort him, of course. Tigellinus, the captain of his guard, suggests new games, new women, new distractions. But Nero only snarls. Every new face reminds him of the one that's gone. Every voice sounds wrong. She was perfect, he mutters. There is no other. You can tell this isn't love anymore. It's obsession stretched beyond repair. Then something shifts. A rumor drifts through the palace about a young singer in the imperial choir. A boy with delicate features, almond eyes, and a calm, careful voice. His name, Sporus. A harmless name, one among hundreds of palace servants. But the whisper reaches Nero's ear like a spark landing on dry oilcloth. The emperor demands to see him. You might think this is where sanity will stop the story, that grief will exhaust itself. But grief, in Nero's hands, becomes theater. He looks at Boris, really looks at him, and something in his mind clicks into place. The curve of the jaw, the softness of the face, it all echoes Poppaea. For a heartbeat, Nero believes she's been returned to him in another form. He calls the boy closer. Sporus trembles, sensing danger but unable to refuse. The emperor touches his cheek. "Don't be afraid," Nero whispers, though the words sound less like comfort and more like a spell. That's when you realize you're standing at the edge of an abyss. The emperor's love has curdled into something that can no longer recognize boundaries, only replacements. The moonlight spills across the marble floor. The scent of lilies thick in the air, and you know the empire itself is about to cross a line no law could have imagined. Because Nero isn't done mourning Poppaea. He's just decided to bring her back. You wake the next morning to a Rome that smells like too much perfume and too little sense. The sun hits the palace gardens. The roses seem to bloom just to mock you. Soft, pink, and perfect, like Poppaea's old cheeks once were. Nero wanders through them, trailing his fingers over petals, as if each one owes him an apology. The city outside hums with its usual chaos, but within these walls, time moves differently. It's always twilight here, always halfway between pleasure and paranoia. Rome has never seen an emperor so obsessed with beauty. The air itself feels rehearsed. Slaves sprinkle flower petals along his path. Musicians follow him like a personal soundtrack, and even the statues seem to blush under so much attention. You can almost hear Nero whisper, "The world should look like art." But art requires control. And control is the one thing slipping from his grip. Inside the palace, the courtiers speak carefully, their smiles taut as lyre strings. You imagine what it must feel like to live near a god who's losing his mind. Every laugh calculated, every gesture watched. Tigellinus hovers nearby, half bodyguard, half babysitter, pretending that the emperor's growing strangeness is divine inspiration. And perhaps it is, in a sick way. Nero's grief has become policy. He orders Poppaea's portraits repainted with halos. He renames months after her. He builds fountains shaped like her face, each one flowing with rosewater. The city smells like her, looks like her, but can't bring her back. If you've ever seen someone cling to nostalgia too tightly, remodeling their house to look like the past keeping an empty chair at dinner. You can imagine what's happening here, only multiplied by an empire. Nero turns memory into architecture. Every stone, every sound, every scent becomes a shrine. Rome becomes his mausoleum of denial. And Sporus? He's still a shadow in the corner. His name not yet famous, but his fate already sealed. When Nero sees him, his grief pauses. The emperor studies that face again and again, the delicate jaw, the soft tone of voice, the frightened eyes. He begins to call Sporus to perform, to sing softly while he eats, to recite lines Poppaea once loved. You can feel the tension in the air. Every servant knows something dangerous is brewing, but no one dares whisper the truth. Nero's mourning is no longer about the dead. It's about domination. One night, during a private feast, Nero declares that Poppaea's soul still walks the palace. He claims he hears her voice in the wind, sees her reflection in water. The guests, terrified of contradicting him, nod and smile. Then he turns to Sporus, eyes gleaming like candlelight reflected on wine. "Do you hear her too?" he asks. The boy swallows hard, unsure what answer will keep him alive. "Yes, my lord," he whispers. Nero claps his hands in delight. "Then you understand." From that moment, Sporus becomes the living echo of the empress. He's summoned to stand beside the emperor during ceremonies, to wear the same silks Poppaea once wore. You'd think the senators might object, but these are men who've learned that silence is safer than sanity. They keep their faces blank while Nero drapes pearls over the boy's shoulders, admiring his creation. To him, grief is now art, and art is possession. Rome itself mirrors Nero's madness. In the streets, you hear gossip muttered behind cupped hands. He's lost his reason, some say. He's touched by gods. Others counter. But no one dares speak too loudly. This is the age when truth can get you exiled, or worse, invited to dinner. Even the architecture reflects the emperor's moods. The Domus Aurea, his new golden house, rises from the ruins of ordinary Rome like a hallucination. Ceilings of ivory, walls coated with jewels, fountains spitting wine. There's even a dining room with a revolving ceiling, meant to mimic the heavens turning in honor of Nero's existence. He calls it paradise. Most Romans call it obscene. And through it all, the emperor hums to himself, as if Poppaea's ghost is listening. He commissions poets to write odes about eternal love, about resurrection, about beauty reborn. "She will live again," he murmurs one night, staring into a bowl of goldfish, as if the ripples can answer him. "The gods owe me that much." You can tell he means it. You can feel the madness settling into certainty. Sporus becomes his test subject. The emperor begins transforming him slowly, changing his clothes, his hair, even his scent. Rumors say Nero sends physicians to examine the boy's face, to find ways to soften it further. It's all whispered, of course, but in Rome, whispers travel faster than chariots. You almost pity the courtiers who have to pretend this is normal. Imagine being one of them, sitting through another banquet where the emperor recites poetry to a trembling youth dressed like his dead wife. You can't laugh, can't cry, can't look away. You just sip your watered wine and pray someone else catches the emperor's eye first. Rome under Nero smells like roses, but feels like smoke. The more he decorates the world, the less human he becomes. The emperor, who once charmed crowds with music, now uses his art to erase reality itself. And yet, when he looks at Sporus, he smiles with something almost tender. Almost. That's the danger, isn't it? Sometimes the most terrifying madness wears the gentlest face. You hear it first, as a whisper in the marble corridors. Sporus, the boy who looks like Poppaea. He's no noble, no senator's son, just a choir singer from humble birth, trained to keep his eyes down and his voice soft. Yet somehow, his resemblance to the late empress has turned him into the most dangerous mirror in Rome. It's funny how power works here. One moment, you're invisible. The next, you're sacred, and neither feels safe. When Nero first calls for him, the boy is terrified. He walks through halls where even laughter is rehearsed, clutching his robe like a shield. The emperor sits beneath a fresco of gods, a golden wreath resting crookedly on his curls. His gaze fixes on Sporus, and you can almost feel the air thicken. "Come closer," Nero says, voice calm, almost kind. You know that kind of calm, the sort people use when they've already decided something terrible. Sporus obeys. His sandals echo softly on the marble, each step carrying him deeper into history's strangest love story. Nero studies him, like an artist inspecting a statue half carved by fate. "You have her eyes," the emperor murmurs. "Do you know that?" The boy shakes his head. Of course he doesn't know. He's spent his life trying not to be noticed, and now every glance feels like a trap. But Nero keeps looking. His hand twitches, as if tempted to touch what he's lost. "Yes," he whispers, "she has returned to me." You might wonder why no one stops this. Where are the senators, the generals, the priests? They're all right there, pretending not to see. Because in Rome, survival often means applauding insanity. And who among them would dare say that the emperor's grief has curdled into something unnatural? You've seen this pattern before, in palaces and offices alike. When power tilts toward delusion, everyone else learns to nod. From that day, Sporus becomes a fixture at Nero's side. He attends banquets, recites verses, even appears in public processions. The court begins to whisper new titles: the emperor's shadow, Poppaea reborn. Some say Nero even speaks to him in Poppaea's old pet names, cooing across the dinner table as if the dead woman herself has answered back. The boy smiles faintly when commanded, the way a caged bird sings when prodded. If you close your eyes, you can imagine the contrast. The emperor in his gleaming toga, dripping with emeralds, and beside him, this fragile echo of a boy, pale and trembling under layers of silk. It's almost theatrical. No surprise, really, since Nero's life is one endless performance. He doesn't just want power, he wants applause. And Sporus becomes his living prop, proof that even death can't refuse his encore. There's something hauntingly modern about it, isn't there? People still do this. Try to resurrect what's gone by reshaping someone new in the old image. Maybe not with imperial surgeons, but with words, expectations, demands. Lovers compared to ghosts, children molded into memories. Nero just had the stage and the ego to make his delusion official. But for Sporus, every moment is a test. How do you live as someone else's memory? The boy learns quickly which words please, which gestures soothe. When Nero sings, he smiles. When Nero drinks, he pours. When Nero dreams aloud about their future together, he listens, nods, pretends. Because in this empire, obedience is oxygen. The servants talk when they think no one hears. He looks just like her. One murmurs while refilling wine. Even the way he walks, that's because the emperor makes him. Another interrupts, eyes darting toward the door. They go quiet again, as if the very walls might report them. You start to see the pattern forming. Nero isn't grieving Poppaea anymore. He's reconstructing her, piece by trembling piece, using Sporus as raw material. It's artistry by cruelty, devotion by distortion. He doesn't just want the illusion. He wants permanence. I will never lose her again, he says one night to Tigellinus, who nods with the reflex of a man who has long stopped believing in right or wrong. If Rome could feel embarrassment, it would blush. But Rome is numb, dulled by spectacles and luxury. The people care less about what their emperor does in private, and more about whether the next festival includes free bread. That's how tyranny always settles in, quietly, while everyone's distracted by fireworks. Still, somewhere between the incense and the applause, you sense something dreadful approaching. Nero's obsession is no longer satisfied with resemblance. He wants transformation. You might think this is where some advisor would intervene, or the gods would strike him down with a lightning bolt, or at least someone would whisper, "Enough." But this is Nero we're talking about. A man who once performed poetry on stage, while soldiers threatened to kill anyone who didn't clap loud enough. Subtlety is not his strength. So, in the soft glow of torchlight, surrounded by perfumed air and trembling servants, he speaks the words that freeze everyone in place. If she has returned in this form, he says, looking at Sporus, then we must make her whole again. It's hard to tell what's worse, that he means it, or that everyone else pretends not to understand what he means. But you understand. Because when grief and power hold hands, nature itself is next to break. It begins with a command no one dares question. Make him like her, Nero says, voice steady, eyes distant, as if he's ordering a painting retouched. But this isn't paint or marble, it's flesh. You can almost hear the silence ripple through the palace, the shuffle of sandals as physicians bow and obey, their faces drained of color. Rome has seen cruelty before, but this feels different. Clinical, ceremonial. The madness of a man who believes the gods have granted him editing rights over humanity itself. What kind of power does it take to look at another human being and see raw material? The kind that comes from too much applause and not enough resistance. Nero was raised to believe he could bend reality by decree, change the calendar, rename months, redefine virtue. Why not anatomy? The boy, Sporus, stands frozen, his mind spinning between confusion and terror. He's been summoned to the emperor's private chamber under the pretense of honor. The marble floor gleams, reflecting candlelight like liquid gold. Perfume thickens the air until it's hard to breathe. You can sense the trap closing even before the order is spoken. You will become her, Nero says. The gods demand it. There's a special kind of cruelty in how gently he says it. You've probably seen something like it before. Someone insisting they're helping you while holding the knife. Nero convinces himself this is devotion, not destruction. He's restoring balance, fulfilling destiny. In his mind, love is permission for anything. The surgeons arrive at night. Their hands tremble. Their eyes flicker toward the floor. No one wants to be the man who refuses an emperor. The chamber is silent except for Nero's breathing. When it's over, Sporus doesn't scream, at least not aloud. The Empire sleeps while one life is unmade for another's fantasy. You can imagine the whispers that follow. The next morning, Nero appears at breakfast, radiant, humming a tune. "She's returned," he declares to no one in particular. "My Poppaea walks again." And the senators, terrified and polite, bow their heads and pretend to rejoice. Rome has always known how to make madness look majestic. But beneath the rituals, something darker lingers. The palace servants avoid eye contact when Sporus passes. The boy now moves like a ghost, drifting through halls where laughter curdles. Nero calls him "my dear one," "my empress," "my eternity." Each word lands like a brand. You almost want to look away, but history doesn't allow that. It makes you watch. And here's the part that hits hardest. Nero truly believes he's resurrected love. He dresses Sporus in Poppæa's gowns, veils him in jewels, speaks to him in whispers only the dead should hear. At feasts, he seats the boy beside him and feeds him from his own hand. The court claps on cue. It's theater again, Rome's favorite drug. Only this time, the tragedy isn't fiction. Hook, because this moment deserves one. The emperor of the known world has just declared war on reality itself. You can feel how fragile the empire has become, how it wobbles under the weight of one man's delusion. Every empire meets its breaking point somewhere, some on battlefields, others in bedrooms. Nero's is here, between silk sheets and candlelight, where grief mutates into tyranny. Sporus barely speaks. When he does, his voice is thin, practiced, like someone afraid of being too real. You can tell he's trying to survive by disappearing inside himself. Maybe you've known that feeling, the instinct to shrink, to become what someone demands just to stay safe. But Sporus doesn't just play a role, he becomes trapped inside it. Nero's affection is suffocating, a velvet cage locked from the outside. Rome watches all this unfold in uneasy silence. Street performers mimic the emperor behind closed doors. Poets write coded verses about gods who reshape mortals for love. But no one says Nero's name. Not yet. You can't mock the sun while it still burns. Meanwhile, Nero's fascination grows. He begins comparing Sporus to the goddess Venus, commissioning new statues to immortalize her beauty. The Senate, desperate to survive, passes decrees praising the emperor's devotion to the divine feminine. You can almost hear the sarcasm scraping beneath the marble speeches. Rome has always loved hypocrisy. It's practically a civic virtue. One evening, Nero stages a private performance of the return of Poppaea. Musicians play harps, dancers whirl, and in the center of it all stands Sporus, veiled in gold, trembling under the weight of so many eyes. Nero watches, tears streaming down his cheeks, not from guilt, but pride. "You see," he cries, "the gods have restored her to me." No one dares contradict him. The applause is deafening, mechanical. You wonder, though, what Sporus feels when the curtains close. Does he still remember his old name, his old voice? Or has the emperor's fantasy consumed him entirely? The tragedy of Sporus isn't just what Nero did to his body. It's what Rome did to his existence. The empire that once celebrated heroes and philosophers now applauds the erasure of a boy who happened to look too much like a ghost. The marble walls of the palace gleam, the fountains murmur, and the emperor sleeps soundly beside his creation. Somewhere outside, a dog barks at the moon, Maybe the only creature in Rome honest enough to howl? The morning sun rises over Rome, and the streets glimmer, as if the empire itself has been polished overnight. But inside the palace, the day begins with something that feels less like ceremony and more like hallucination. A wedding where the bride is already dead, and the groom refuses to admit it. You can smell the incense, hear the soft hum of harps, and see Nero's satisfied smile stretching wider than reason allows. He's calling it destiny. He's calling it love reborn. He's calling it a wedding. The boy stands beside him, veiled in white silk, trembling beneath a crown of pearls, once worn by Poppaea herself. Rome's greatest physicians and tailors have shaped him into a living echo. Shoulders softened, hair curled, perfume chosen to match the memory of a woman who isn't here to object. You want to look away, but history forces you to watch. Because this is more than madness, it's theater in the shape of religion. The guests have been handpicked. Senators, courtiers, musicians, each chosen for their silence. The emperor steps forward, eyes shining, and announces, "Poppaea lives again." You can almost feel the collective tightening of throats. The priests exchange nervous glances. The ceremony proceeds anyway. There's no law against marrying a ghost if you write the laws yourself. A slave carries the imperial ring. Gold, heavy, gleaming with diamonds that could ransom small kingdoms. Nero slides it onto Sporus's finger with trembling reverence. The hall falls silent, except for the rustle of silk and the crackle of torches. Then Nero lifts the veil and kisses him, softly, almost tenderly. The crowd exhales, clapping because not clapping would be suicide. Imagine standing there, watching it unfold. You'd feel the strangeness in your bones, the way grief, power, and performance have fused into one shimmering absurdity. Rome's elite murmur words of blessing, but their eyes dart to one another as if to ask, are we really doing this? Yes, they are. Because Nero has made it law that no one in his presence may contradict his happiness. After the ceremony, a parade follows. Nero insists on showing his bride to the city. The streets bloom with banners, soldiers march in perfect rhythm, and the people cheer, half in confusion, half in fear. You can hear the mixture of awe and unease ripple through the crowd. Children throw petals. Women whisper prayers. Men force laughter that doesn't quite sound human. And there, atop a golden chariot, ride Nero and Sporus. The emperor waves like a triumphant general. The boy beside him stares straight ahead, a mask of serenity carved over terror. The sun glints off his jewels, making him sparkle like something divine and unnatural. Nero leans close, whispering in his ear, "They will remember us forever." He's right about that part. If you've ever been to a wedding where you knew something was terribly wrong, where the smiles looked rehearsed and the air felt too heavy, you might recognize this moment. Except here, the stakes are cosmic. The ruler of the known world has rewritten love itself as spectacle. Later that night, the feast begins. Tables sag under the weight of gold plates and roasted peacocks. Wine flows like water. Nero plays the lyre, singing verses he claims were whispered by Poppaea's spirit. The guests laugh too loudly, cry on cue, and leave wondering if they've just witnessed devotion or desecration. You can sense how the empire's soul is changing under all this velvet madness. Rome used to admire strength, conquest, virtue. Now it applauds illusion. It's a warning written in candlelight. When a ruler's grief becomes entertainment, the empire's heartbeat slows. Through it all, Sporus remains silent. His eyes never meet Nero's for long. When the emperor calls him my empress, he bows his head in practiced gratitude. Somewhere deep inside, the boy who once sang in the imperial choir still flickers, faint as a dying flame. That voice, that small defiance, has nowhere to go in a palace that worships delusion. And Nero? Oh, Nero thrives in the applause. He's found a way to conquer mortality, or at least to pretend he has. To him, Poppaea isn't gone. She's simply changed form. His empire may crumble one day, but his fantasy? That, he thinks, will last forever. It's almost poetic, if poetry could rot. Outside, Rome's night hums with the noise of celebration. But if you listen closely, there's something else beneath it, the slow cracking sound of reason giving way. You can hear it in the wind brushing through the colonnades, in the sighs of servants cleaning up spilled wine, in the cautious footsteps of philosophers who know better than to speak truth tonight. The wedding of Nero and Sporus becomes legend before dawn. Poets will later write about it in whispers. Chroniclers will record it with trembling pens, and Rome will pretend to understand. But you, walking through that candlelit hall, you'd understand what really happened. This wasn't the rebirth of love. It was the funeral of reality, disguised as a celebration. The morning after the wedding, Rome wakes up hungover on incense and disbelief. The city smells of wilting flowers and spilled wine. But inside Nero's palace, the scent is sweet and relentless. Rosewater, musk, and the faint trace of myrrh that used to cling to Poppaea's skin. The emperor calls it home, but it feels more like a gilded cage perfumed to hide the rot underneath. You walk through the corridors and hear the rhythm of routine returning. Guards changing shifts, slaves sweeping petals from the marble floors, eunuchs whispering about last night's spectacle. And in the heart of it all sits Nero, basking in the aftermath of his own delusion. He hums softly, while scribes take notes for new poems inspired by his bride. Beside him, Sporus kneels, silent as a statue, hands folded perfectly in his lap. Their life together settles into something resembling normalcy, though nothing about it is normal. Nero insists on breakfast in bed, silver trays, honeyed figs, and flutes of chilled wine. He feeds Sporus by hand, laughing too loudly at his own jokes. "Eat, my empress," he says, voice soft and dangerous at once. Sporus obeys, because obedience is safer than hesitation. Every motion feels rehearsed, every breath measured against the emperor's mood. Sometimes, Nero drags him to the baths. The steam hangs thick, the air sticky with perfume and fear. Courtiers follow at a distance, pretending this is love. The emperor coos, splashes water, calls Sporus my Poppaea, and tells him he'll never grow old, never fade, never leave. You can feel the horror wrapped in affection, like a snake disguised as a ribbon. At night, Nero hosts banquets that blur into dreams. Musicians play until their fingers bleed. Dancers spin in circles until they collapse, and Sporus sits beside him, veiled and glimmering under lamplight. Guests flatter the emperor, his wisdom, his art, his eternal love. The lies pile higher than the gold cups. Sometimes Nero forces Sporus to stand and sing before them. The boy's voice is fragile, trembling, beautiful, and it makes everyone uncomfortable because beauty that comes from pain always does. If you've ever seen someone cling to an illusion so tightly that they start sculpting reality around it, you'll recognize this feeling. Nero doesn't see Sporus anymore. He only sees the echo he wants. The empire becomes a stage, and Sporus becomes the prop that must never falter. Still, beneath all the silk and ceremony, cracks begin to show. Nero's moods shift like summer storms. One moment, he's tender, stroking Sporus's hair, promising him eternity. The next, he's raging, accusing him of betraying Poppeia's spirit by smiling too little, or too much, or simply existing the wrong way. The courtiers learn to freeze whenever his voice rises. You can almost hear their hearts thudding in sync. Rome itself seems exhausted by him. Grain prices rise, soldiers grumble, provinces rebel. But inside the palace, Nero keeps singing. He builds theaters, plans games, and forces senators to attend his performances in costume. Rome must have beauty, he insists, as if beauty can patch the holes in a dying empire. Through it all, Sporus remains the quiet constant, the reflection Nero refuses to stop gazing at. Sometimes, when the emperor falls asleep, the boy slips away for a few moments of silence. He wanders the gardens, barefoot, under the moonlight that smells faintly of lilies. Maybe he remembers the days before all this, the choir rehearsals, the simple meals, the laughter of ordinary servants. He can't go back now. Rome has turned him into myth. One night, Nero wakes to find him gone. The emperor storms through the halls, shouting her name. Poppaea! Poppaea! Guards scatter, terrified. When they finally find Sporus by a fountain, staring at his reflection, Nero's fury softens into tears. "Don't leave me," he whispers, clutching him as if love were a punishment. "Don't die again." And just like that, the cycle resets. The affection returns, smothering and desperate. Gifts appear: bracelets, rings, perfumes imported from Arabia. Sporus receives them all in silence. It's the silence of survival. You might think by now that Rome would intervene, that someone would stand up to the emperor. But power isolates like a sickness. No one can tell where Nero ends and fear begins. The Senate still calls him Augustus. The priests still bless his madness. The poets still rhyme his name with divine. And somewhere beneath the city's noise, the truth hides. Rome's greatest artist has become its most dangerous spectator. There's irony in how peaceful their life looks from afar. Morning walks through colonnades, dinners beneath frescoed ceilings, laughter echoing through marble halls. But listen closer, and you'll hear the tension humming underneath. The quiet realization that even the most gilded love can rot from the inside. You start to wonder if Sporus ever hopes for Nero's downfall, or if he's too numb to imagine freedom. The boy who once sang for gods now serves one, and the cruel joke is that this god bleeds, rages, and loves like a man who never learned what love truly means. Outside, the empire stirs restlessly. Armies march, fires burn, and whispers rise like smoke. Rome is changing, but Nero refuses to notice. He still believes the world turns to his rhythm. He still calls Sporus my eternity. And for now, eternity obeys. You can build a golden palace, but you can't stop people from laughing behind the walls. It starts quietly, like the rustle of silk before a fall. Rome's streets, once filled with cheers for Nero's games and music, begin to murmur instead. The laughter he once commanded now hides behind hands and half-closed doors. The emperor, who made love a performance, has become the empire's favorite private joke. And Rome, a city that adores spectacle, now finds its biggest show in watching its ruler unravel. You walk through the marketplaces, past stalls of figs and olives, and you hear it. Snatches of songs rewritten with mockery. Poppæa's ghost walks again. Someone sings under their breath, and another snickers before pretending to cough. Even the beggars start mimicking the emperor's high voice and Sporus's quiet steps, though they do it only in alleys where soldiers rarely patrol. Humor has become rebellion, and satire Rome's sharpest blade. Inside the palace, Nero senses it. You can tell by the way his smile falters when the courtiers bow too slowly, by how he lingers over his reflection longer than usual. He asks Sporus, "Do they still adore me?" And though the boy knows the truth, he whispers, "Yes, my lord." It's not a lie. It's survival. Rome has seen tyrants before, but none who demanded applause quite like Nero. Every performance he gives now feels less like art and more like pleading. He takes to the stage dressed in gold and crimson, singing about eternal love, while senators sit stiffly in the audience, clapping until their palms ache. Behind the masks, you can feel the boredom and fear mixing into one heavy silence. Poets begin circulating verses that never use Nero's name, but everyone knows who they mean. A man weds a mirror and calls it devotion. The words slip through taverns, carried by drunks who pretend they don't know the source. Satirists etch small jokes on public walls, clever, dangerous graffiti mocking the emperor's divine marriage. And for once, Rome laughs with honesty. You might compare it to today's gossip, the kind that spreads faster than fact, whispered from one table to the next until the story grows teeth. Only here, gossip can get you executed. Still, the people can't help themselves. When power becomes ridiculous, ridicule becomes power. Even Nero's inner circle begins to fray. Tigellinus, ever the survivor, starts hedging his loyalty, flattering the emperor by day and counting exit routes by night. The Praetorian Guard grumbles about unpaid bonuses. The senators send polite reports praising Nero's art while secretly writing to provincial generals for stability. Everyone can feel it. The empire's center is rotting from laughter. But Nero doesn't retreat. He doubles down. He throws more festivals, orders more statues, and commissions poets to compose hymns comparing Sporus to Venus herself. It's almost tragic. His answer to ridicule is to make the joke bigger. He parades through the streets with Sporus by his side, jewels flashing, veils fluttering, waving like newlyweds at a funeral. The crowd cheers because the soldiers are watching, but their eyes tell a different story. One evening, Nero decides to give a private concert for the Senate, an act of generosity, he calls it. You can picture the room, the flicker of oil lamps, the faint smell of wax and anxiety. The emperor takes the stage, lyre in hand, and sings of lost love and divine beauty. His voice quivers at the word Poppæa, and all eyes turn toward Sporus, sitting silently in the front row. When the song ends, the applause is thunderous and empty. Senators clap because they must, and Nero smiles because he must believe them. That's the cruel rhythm of power. It traps both sides in a lie they can't afford to stop telling. But the ridicule keeps spreading. Across the empire, the provinces grumble about taxes and neglect. Governors write to one another about the actor in Rome. The generals in Gaul and Spain begin to whisper about legitimacy. Even the army, Rome's backbone, starts to think the empire deserves a sturdier spine. Meanwhile, Nero keeps asking Sporus for reassurance. "They mock me because they don't understand," he says one night, pacing before the mirror. "Don't they see what I've created? Don't they see her?" Sporus doesn't answer. There's nothing left to say. You can tell he's learned that sometimes silence is the only kindness left to give a madman. Still, Nero's paranoia grows teeth. He accuses senators of treason, orders the deaths of poets, and bans laughter during public events. Imagine that. An emperor trying to outlaw amusement in the city that invented comedy. Rome doesn't stop laughing. It just gets quieter. And the quieter it gets, the more Nero hears it echoing in his head. He begins to dream of betrayal, of friends with daggers, of soldiers turning their backs. Even the shadows in his palace seem to whisper now. The golden walls that once reflected his glory now reflect his fear. The empire that once mirrored his will now mirrors his madness. Sporus sits beside him still, loyal because there's nowhere else to go. Sometimes, Nero strokes his hair and murmurs, "You and I against the world." But you can tell he doesn't mean it as love anymore. It's a confession of loneliness, the kind that makes even tyrants tremble. Outside, the laughter continues, quiet, persistent, and unstoppable. Rome has learned the one lesson every tyrant forgets. No empire, no matter how perfumed, can silence a joke that's already true. The smell of smoke reaches you before the sound does. First a flicker on the horizon, then a gust of heat that makes the night sky shimmer red. Rome is burning, and somewhere deep inside his golden palace, Nero smiles as if the world has finally matched his mood. People will argue for centuries about whether he ordered it, but standing here, listening to the distant crackle, seeing the strange calm on his face, you already know. This fire isn't just destruction, it's theater. He stands at the balcony, draped in white robes that glow orange under the rising flames. In one hand, a lyre. In the other, a goblet of wine. "It's beautiful," he whispers, "a tragedy in real time." He begins to sing, a slow, haunting melody about Troy and its fall, comparing himself to the poets who watched cities die. The courtiers around him nod, unsure whether to applaud or run. Down below, chaos swallows the streets. Families clutching possessions, soldiers shouting orders, priests carrying idols through the smoke. The air tastes like copper and ash. It's the kind of night that makes people question their gods. You'd think an emperor would rush to help, but Nero is busy admiring the color of ruin. Beside him, Sporus watches silently, face pale against the firelight. You can tell he's thinking what no one dares say aloud. Rome is burning, and the emperor is composing its soundtrack. In his mind, it's art. Everything is art. The pain, the fear, the collapse, it's all part of his grand performance. Maybe you've met someone like that too. Someone who mistakes destruction for passion, who can't tell the difference between creating and consuming. Nero just has more candles and an empire to light them with. By morning, half the city is gone. The smell of wet ash hangs heavy, and Nero rides through ruins wearing a tunic embroidered with stars, pretending to grieve. "See how the gods test us," he says, voice cracking just enough to sound sincere. He promises to rebuild Rome, grander and purer. But the people aren't convinced. They saw who was holding the lyre when the flames rose. And yet, what follows is almost beyond imagination. From the ashes, Nero constructs his masterpiece, the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. You've heard of it, perhaps. Walls plated with gold leaf, ceilings dripping with ivory, a lake built for moonlight reflections. At its heart, a colossal statue of himself as the sun god. When asked if the new palace was big enough, he reportedly said, "At last, I can live like a human being." You can't help but laugh a little at the absurdity. It's the kind of line that belongs on a modern headline. Man who set fire to city finally feels comfortable in own home. But Rome isn't laughing anymore. The city that once adored him now whispers openly about divine punishment. Bread grows scarce, taxes rise, and the scent of rebellion drifts thicker than incense. Still, Nero hosts feasts among the ruins. He fills his halls with music and laughter, forcing cheer into a grieving city. Sporus sits beside him, draped in pearls that sparkle like tears. The emperor calls him my goddess of light. As if one illusion could outshine an empire's anger, the guests applaud on command, their clapping echoing hollow through gilded halls. You can hear the empire cracking between the notes. The spectacle never ends. Nero begins to act on stage again, performing scenes of love and loss with Sporus by his side, veiled and silent. The people come, not out of devotion, but out of fear. Every performance is mandatory worship. Every tear he sheds is rehearsed. Every laugh sounds forced. Rome has become his audience. And like all audiences forced to stay too long, it's growing restless. One night, a senator dares to joke that Rome burns so Nero can shine. The words travel faster than wildfire, whispered in bathhouses, muttered in taverns, scratched into walls. The emperor's spies hear it everywhere. Nero's paranoia deepens. He orders arrests, executions, purges. But you can't kill a rumor once it's true. Amid the fear, Nero finds comfort only in Sporus. They dine together in near silence, a strange domesticity forming out of the ruins. The emperor sometimes stares at him for minutes without speaking, as if searching for reassurance that at least one part of his fantasy still obeys. And Sporus, exhausted and expressionless, gives it to him. Because what else can he give? If you've ever seen someone try to outsing their own downfall, you understand Nero now. He performs not to be loved anymore, but to delay silence. Because silence would mean listening to the truth, that his empire no longer believes in him, that his golden walls are built on ashes. As weeks turn to months, the fire becomes memory. The city rebuilds itself around resentment, and whispers turn into plans. Generals in distant provinces begin to speak of a new dawn. The Senate begins to count the days. But in Nero's palace, the music plays on, soft and desperate. He still believes Rome loves him. He still believes he can command applause by decree. He still believes Sporus's quiet smile means devotion instead of pity. And as the embers cool, one truth becomes clear. The empire won't collapse in a single explosion. It will die slowly, to the sound of Nero's songs echoing through smoke. It ends, as most empires do, not with an explosion, but with footsteps fading down a corridor. You can almost hear them now, the uneven rhythm of sandals scraping marble as Nero flees his own palace, clutching a few coins, his robe torn, his crown left behind. The emperor who once commanded nations now hides in the shadows like a criminal, muttering to himself, "Even Rome has betrayed me." It didn't happen overnight, though it probably felt that way to him. The signs had been there for months, rebellions flaring in distant provinces, generals declaring loyalty to the Senate and the people instead of the emperor. The Praetorian Guard, the same men who once cheered his songs, turning their spears away. One by one, his lifeline snapped, leaving him dangling in the silence he feared most. When the Senate finally brands him a public enemy, the proclamation spreads like wildfire. You can imagine the scene. Statues toppled, portraits smashed, his name chiseled off monuments. The same people who once wept at his performances now spit at his memory. The actor emperor is finished, someone says in the forum, and Rome exhales as if waking from a long fever dream. Inside the palace, Nero refuses to believe it. They can't survive without me, he insists to anyone who will listen. But no one listens anymore. Servants vanish. Courtiers pack their treasures and disappear into the night. The golden halls grow cold. The only one who stays is Sporus. You can picture it. The boy sitting quietly at the edge of the emperor's bed, eyes lowered, voice soft. "What will you do now, my lord?" Nero looks at him, startled, as if hearing that question for the first time. What will he do? Rule the ashes? Sing to the statues? He laughs, a short, broken sound. "The world was cruel to us," he says, "but the gods will not abandon me." You can hear how small his voice sounds now. The gods, it seems, have stopped taking requests. Tigellinus, ever the opportunist, abandons him next, fleeing with whatever loyalty he hadn't already sold. News arrives that the army in Gaul has declared a new emperor. The Senate has endorsed it. The city waits for Nero's capture. He still tries to command, but the words come out hollow. You can tell he's rehearsing the lines of a play that no one wants to watch anymore. So he runs. He rides through the night with a handful of servants, Sporus among them, the moonlight painting the dust in silver. The roads that once cleared for his chariot now stretch empty, indifferent. Somewhere beyond the city, he finds refuge in a crumbling villa belonging to a freedman named Phaon, the emperor of Rome, hiding in someone else's garden. You can almost feel the chill of the dawn settling over him. He's frightened now, truly frightened for the first time. "They'll tear me apart," he whispers, pacing like a trapped animal. "They'll drag me through the streets." His imagination, once his stage, turns against him, replaying every humiliation he ever dealt. And through it all, Sporus remains at his side, quiet, watchful, perhaps even pitying. There's something tragically human in that image. Nero, who burned cities to feel like a god, now trembling like a man waiting for judgment. He touches Sporus's cheek, murmuring, "You will not leave me, will you?" And the boy, who has lived too long in obedience, simply shakes his head. By morning, the sounds of pursuit draw closer. Soldiers, hoofbeats, voices calling his name. Nero grabs a dagger, stares at it as if seeing it for the first time. "What an artist dies in me," he whispers. You can tell he means it. It's not repentance, not remorse, just vanity to the end. He still believes history will remember him as misunderstood genius, not the madman who mistook applause for eternity. But when it comes to the act itself, he can't do it. His hands shake. He turns to Sporus. "Help me," he pleads. The boy hesitates, tears in his eyes. Imagine the weight of that moment, helping the man who destroyed your life find peace in death. For a moment, neither moves. Then, with the soldiers closing in, Nero thrusts the blade into his throat, guided by Sporus's trembling hands. It's over in seconds. The emperor collapses, gasping, the echo of his final words, "Too late." This is loyalty, fading into silence. The man who called himself divine now lies on the floor, like any other mortal. Sporus kneels beside him, blood soaking his robe, his face expressionless. Around them, the first birds of morning begin to sing. Rome will crown a new ruler by noon, but for now, there's only this: a boy, a corpse, and the end of an empire's performance. The irony is almost cruel. Nero dies fearing humiliation, yet history will turn him into exactly what he dreaded: a symbol of absurdity, a cautionary tale wrapped in gold. And Sporus, still breathing, becomes the final witness. You'd think this is where the story ends. But history, like grief, always leaves a haunting. Sometimes the curtain doesn't fall when the play ends. It just leaves one actor standing there, unsure whether to bow or run. You'd think death would have freed Sporus. The emperor is gone. The marble halls are silent, and Rome has a new ruler. But freedom in this empire does come for survivors. It comes for those who vanish. Sporus can't vanish. He's too memorable, too strange, too perfectly carved by another man's madness to ever be ordinary again. After Nero's suicide, the empire scrambles to erase his memory. Statues are melted, coins reminted, names chiseled off stone. But one thing they can't erase is the boy who was once called Empress. His existence is a rumor that breathes. He walks through Rome's streets like a living ghost, a relic of someone else's delusion. And for a brief moment, you can almost feel the city's pity. Almost. Because Rome has always loved gossip more than grief. The same senators who once bowed to Nero now invite Sporus to dinner, curious to glimpse the creature who shared an emperor's bed. They ask polite, poisonous questions. Was he gentle? Did he really believe you were her? And Sporus answers with silence. The only language left that doesn't betray him. Soon, the empire changes hands again. Otho rises, Nero's old ally, a man who knows how to survive tides. And in one of history's most absurd repetitions, Otho claims Sporus for himself. You'd think he'd pity the boy, but pity isn't a Roman luxury. Instead, he does what Rome always does with beauty. It turns it into spectacle. Otho dresses him in Poppaea's old gowns, too, calls him lady, parades him through banquets as if to remind everyone that Nero's ghost still attends their feasts. You can imagine Sporus sitting there, motionless, while laughter swirls around him like smoke. He's no longer a person now. He's punctuation in Rome's cruel joke. The irony burns, doesn't it? The empire mocked Nero for his madness, then repeated it out of habit. Because power doesn't learn, it imitates. When Otho dies, the boy passes again into other hands. Each new emperor treats him as a curiosity, a token of a darker age they claim to despise but can't stop reenacting. It's as if Rome itself can't let go of Nero's fantasy. You start to wonder if this city is addicted to tragedy, if it only knows how to survive by reliving its worst moments in better lighting. By the time Vitellius takes power, the empire has already eaten its own tail. Vitellius, coarse and gluttonous, summons Sporus for amusement, mocking him publicly, calling him Empress in front of soldiers. The laughter echoes off marble, cruel and heavy. Someone suggests reenacting Nero's wedding in jest, a parody of the same ceremony that once crowned Sporus Queen of Rome. The room bursts into cheers. Torches flare. The stage is prepared. Sporus stands there, trembling, realizing that Rome's cruelty has come full circle. The empire that once worshipped him now laughs at him, and the same city that applauded his humiliation under Nero now demands an encore. He doesn't give it to them. Before the mock ceremony can begin, Sporus slips away. Somewhere in the palace shadows, he takes his own life. The boy who was remade, renamed, and rehearsed beyond recognition finally writes his own ending. No audience, no applause, just silence. History barely notices. Chroniclers record it in half sentences, calling him a pitiable youth, a reminder of Nero's shame. But you can tell that's not the whole story. Because if you listen closely, if you really listen, you can hear something in that silence. Not weakness, not despair. Defiance. It's as though Sporus, in choosing his death, finally reclaimed what Nero stole from him, the right to exist on his own terms. You think about what it means to be remembered that way, how history records the loud, but rarely the quiet. Nero's name will echo forever in marble and ink, but Sporus's voice lingers somewhere softer, like a hum beneath the noise. A ghost of humanity surviving inside cruelty's architecture. And maybe that's the real legacy here. Not the emperors, not the palaces, not the songs or statues, but the quiet endurance of someone who lived through it all. The boy who outlasted the god. Centuries later, writers will retell this story with disbelief, as if it's myth, as if no empire could ever twist love into that shape again. But the truth is, history doesn't repeat. It rhymes. Every age has its Neros, people who believe they can rewrite others into their own fantasy. And every age has its Sporus, those who survive long enough to remind the world that beauty and obedience are not the same thing. You walk away from this story a little heavier, maybe, because it's not just a story about Rome. It's about what happens when grief turns to control, when love becomes possession, and when power forgets that the people under it are still human. The emperor's songs have long faded. The golden house is dust. But somewhere in the quiet corners of history, a whisper remains. He tried to erase me. I outlived him. Nero's twisted love story with Sporus shows how power can turn grief into madness, how an emperor's loneliness became cruelty wrapped in gold. Yet Nero was only one in a long line of rulers who mistook desire for divinity. Tonight, you'll wander deeper into Rome's decadence, meeting the most perverted emperors in history and the empire that adored them. Imagine a 24-year-old with unlimited money, absolute power, and not a single person brave enough to tell him no. Now imagine that person thinks he's a god. Welcome to the reign of Caligula, Rome's most dangerous comedian. You step into Rome's marble heart, where statues outnumber people and gossip travels faster than chariots. The year is 37 CE. Emperor Tiberius has just died, leaving behind a legacy of fear, and his grandnephew, Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, better known as Caligula. At first, the city breathes again. After years of paranoia and exile under Tiberius, the Senate hails this young man as a savior. The people chant his name. Coins gleam with his face. Mothers lift their babies to see him pass. But Rome soon learns that smiles can be dangerous weapons. Within months, Caligula transforms from golden heir to golden nightmare. You watch him stride through the forum wearing a purple toga, calling himself Neptune's brother. Then order the guards to collect seashells as war trophies from his victory over the ocean. It sounds like a bad joke, but no one laughs, at least not where he can hear. He declares himself a living god, builds a temple to his own divinity and stations priests to burn incense to him. If Instagram existed, his profile would just read deity. Emperor. Full-time drama citizens start whispering that the young ruler lost his mind after an illness early in his reign. Others say he's just showing Rome what power really looks like when it stops pretending to be decent. His cruelty arrives with theatrical flair. He invites senators to dinner, flatters them, then makes them run beside his chariot the next morning until they collapse. He announces new tax reforms. On lawsuits, marriages, even the air Romans breathe. He once ordered the construction of a floating bridge across the Bay of Baiae, just so he could ride his horse across the sea and outdo Alexander the Great. Picture that? An emperor turning naval engineers into stagehands for his ego. One day, Caligula appears in public wearing a woman's gown and jewels, announcing he's married the goddess Luna. The crowd claps on cue. Later that week, he orders his horse, Incitatus, to be made a senator. Historians still argue whether he was mocking the Senate or sincerely thought a horse could do a better job. Either way, the animal ate better than most Romans. Gold flake oats, marble stalls, and a house with servants. You wonder, was Caligula insane, or was he simply honest about what others only dreamed of doing with absolute power? Roman historians like Suetonius and Cassius Dio paint him as a mad tyrant who delighted in humiliation. But maybe madness was just another performance. Every empire needs its villain, and Caligula played the part with Oscar-worthy enthusiasm. He loved the stage more than the throne. He performed dances in the palace, sang tragic songs about heroes who lost everything, and forced noblemen to applaud until their hands blistered. In one story, he halted a gladiator match halfway through to lecture the crowd about mercy, then fed the entire audience's relatives to wild beasts for balance. You almost admire the consistency. There's a darker thread running under the laughter, though. Caligula was born into tragedy. His father, Germanicus, was beloved by the legions and died mysteriously, possibly poisoned. His mother and brothers were executed or exiled under Tiberius. He grew up watching betrayal as bedtime entertainment. By the time he took the throne, cruelty wasn't corruption. It was survival training. Still, even by Roman standards, his indulgence shocks the city. He drains the treasury on festivals, games, and endless banquets where guests must flatter him between courses of flamingo tongue and peacock brain. The Senate begs him to control spending. He replies by inventing new taxes on weddings and even prostitution. When the economy collapses, he blames the gods and builds bigger temples. One afternoon, Caligula strolls into the Senate chamber, announces he's a god again, and demands to know why no one sacrificed to him that morning. A senator hesitates. That pause costs him his fortune. You can almost hear the collective inhale as the guards drag the man away. Later, Caligula will boast that fear is the best tax of all. It never runs out. His vanity turns dangerous when paranoia joins the party. He starts seeing conspiracies everywhere, senators plotting, guards whispering, even his sisters accused of treason. Executions become daily theater. The imperial palace turns into a maze of locked doors and hidden listeners. Servants learn to smile without showing teeth. And yet, amidst all the madness, the city can't look away. The people who curse him by night still cheer him by day. Maybe it's fascination. Maybe it's terror. But that's the trick of tyranny. It doesn't just rule you, it entertains you. You watch the crowds laughing at his jokes, knowing they're laughing for their lives. Eventually, even his guards lose patience. The Praetorian commander, Cassius Chaerea, tired of being mocked for his soft voice, plots revenge. One February afternoon in 41 CE, Caligula strides through a theater passage, humming to himself, when the blades find him. Rome breathes again, but quietly, just in case the next emperor is listening. And as his blood cools on the marble, you can almost hear the city whisper, maybe madness is born from power. Maybe it's what happens when no one dares to say stop. When Caligula falls, the city exhales, but not for long. Rome has learned that removing one tyrant is easy. Finding a sane replacement is the real sport. The Senate scrambles, soldiers mutter, and behind all the marble noise, a timid, stuttering uncle named Claudius suddenly finds himself emperor. He's no monster, just awkward and bookish. So people think peace has finally returned. But peace in Rome never lasts longer than a good dinner party. Enter Nero. He doesn't rise overnight. At first, he's just a charming teenager, the adopted son of Emperor Claudius, adored by the crowds, tutored by philosophers like Seneca. The Romans see him as cultured, poetic, even gentle. After Caligula's chaos, that softness feels like fresh air. You almost root for him. But power in Rome is like fine wine. It goes sour if left too long open. Nero's early years are a performance of virtue. He lowers taxes, bans executions, hosts games for the people. He even opens his palace gates to the poor, reciting poems by lamplight. But behind the velvet curtains, something begins to warp. His mother, Agrippina the Younger, one of history's most formidable women, rules through him. She sits beside him at state meetings, corrects his speeches, and makes sure everyone remembers whose bloodline flows in his veins. You can almost imagine the tension. A mother so ambitious, she helped poison her own husband Claudius to secure her son's throne, and a son so smothered by her presence, he begins to dream of freedom the worst ways. The court whispers about their closeness. Ancient gossip makes them out to be lovers, but that's probably exaggeration mixed with malice. Still, their relationship is strange enough to feed every rumor Rome can invent. Soon, Nero decides that Mother Knows Best has an expiration date. The first attempt to kill her, a collapsing ceiling, fails. The second, a sabotaged ship, also fails. Agrippina swims to shore, furious and dripping with seawater. You almost hear Nero sigh as he finally sends men with daggers. They return with news he's waited years to hear. Your mother sends you her approval with her last breath. From that moment, Nero becomes his own god. He's not content ruling Rome. He wants to perform it. The emperor who once posed as philosopher now dyes his hair, strums a lyre, and hosts theatrical contests where, surprise, he always wins. Senators are forced to applaud until they faint. Nobles buy tickets to his plays, not for pleasure, but survival. Imagine a CEO who insists everyone attend his karaoke night under threat of execution. That's Nero's management style. And he doesn't stop at music. He races chariots in the Circus Maximus, sings in tragedies, and acts on stage in stories where he plays both hero and villain. The people whisper that the emperor of the world has turned into an actor, a profession once reserved for slaves. But in Nero's mind, art isn't beneath power, it's its purest form. To rule, he once said, is to be watched. Then comes the night that defines him forever. July 18th, 64 CE. Flames engulf Rome. For 6 days, the city burns like a sacrifice. Thousands die, and rumors spread faster than fire. Nero started it himself to make room for his new golden house, an opulent palace stretching across the city like a private kingdom. Historians still debate it. Some say the fire began accidentally in a shop full of oil and spices. Others say the emperor really did want a blank canvas for his architectural masterpiece. You stand in the ashes with the survivors, listening to Nero strum his lyre atop a balcony, singing of Troy's burning. The legend says he fiddled while Rome burned. Maybe it's a myth. Maybe it's worse, that he was actually moved by the beauty of destruction. When the smoke clears, he needs someone to blame. He chooses a small, obscure religious group known for refusing to worship Roman gods, the Christians. He accuses them of arson, turning public rage into a circus of cruelty. They're crucified, burned as human torches, or torn by dogs, while the emperor watches from his garden, clapping to the rhythm of their screams. Entertainment, he calls it. You wonder if the gods he sings about are clapping too. The Senate grows restless. His paranoia grows louder. He executes his wife Octavia, marries another named Poppaea, then allegedly kills her in a fit of rage. Even his advisors flee or fall on their swords. The empire begins to rot under his golden house's shadow. By 68 CE, Rome's patience burns out completely. Generals rebel, legions refuse orders, and the Senate finally declares Nero an enemy of the state. The emperor flees the city that once cheered his every performance. Hiding in a villa outside Rome, he begs his secretary to end his life when soldiers approach. His last words, fittingly theatrical, echo through the centuries. What an artist dies in me. The city rejoices, but not without irony. The man who saw himself as the world's greatest performer left behind a civilization that never stopped performing him. Plays, paintings, gossip, even modern films still recreate his madness. You almost think he'd be pleased. And as Rome scrapes away the ashes of his reign, you start to see the pattern forming. In this empire, every ruler begins as salvation and ends as spectacle. The audience always demands a sequel. Rome doesn't rest for long. After Nero's exit, the empire becomes a revolving door of forgettable emperors. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, all fighting over a throne that's starting to look more like a trap than a prize. But then, through the smoke of civil war, comes a man who seems different, stronger, the son of Marcus Aurelius, philosopher king of Rome. Surely his child must be wise, virtuous, maybe even a little noble, you'd think. Meet Commodus, the man who turned the Colosseum into his personal reality show long before Netflix dreamed of it. He's born in silk sheets, raised among philosophers, and trained to lead a world empire. But unlike his father, who spent nights reading Plato, Commodus spends his dreaming about the arena. Where Marcus Aurelius wrote about inner peace and discipline, Commodus scribbles lists of his favorite gladiator names. Imagine being the son of a world-respected philosopher and deciding your life goal is to become a professional cosplayer with sharper weapons. When Marcus dies in 180 CE, Commodus inherits not just the throne, but the world's largest ego. At first, he's promising, handsome, athletic, adored by the people, but within months, he swaps governance for games. The empire still has wars, plagues, and taxes, but the new emperor's top priority is renaming Rome Colonia Commodiana. the colony of Commodus. Modesty clearly didn't make it through inheritance. He begins to see himself not as a ruler, but as a living god. He claims descent from Hercules, even wearing the lion's skin and carrying a club during ceremonies. You picture the Senate's faces, trying not to blink as their emperor stands half-naked in furs, flexing mid-meeting. One senator whispers, "Hercules labored 12 times. We labor every day." But Commodus isn't content posing. He wants applause, so he descends into the Colosseum, not as a spectator, but as a performer. The emperor of Rome becomes its most enthusiastic gladiator. He fights beasts, disarms prisoners, and accepts crowns of flowers while cheering crowds chant his name. The fights, of course, are rigged. His opponents are exhausted, half-blind, or simply bribed not to win. Still, he charges the city for every appearance. Rome literally pays to watch its emperor pretend to risk his life. Sometimes he spares a defeated fighter as an act of mercy. Other times, he orders them slain for looking at him too long. He even executes a wounded man for bleeding on him mid-performance. You think, not for the first time, that maybe absolute power should come with an instruction manual. And yet the people adore him. After years of political speeches and stoic emperors, Rome enjoys this strange celebrity monarch. He gives them bread, games, and spectacle. Never mind that the treasury bleeds dry funding his shows. He parades through the city dressed as Hercules, tossing coins from a chariot drawn by ostriches. He renames the months after his titles: Lucius, Aelius, Commodus, Augustus, Pius, Felix. Basically, he makes the calendar an autobiography. Behind the laughter, though, the empire trembles. The Senate hates him. The generals mock him. The nobles fear him. His reign becomes a game of survival for everyone within shouting distance. You can't tell if he's truly insane or just bored beyond imagination. Maybe both. At banquets, he forces guests to drink until they collapse, then jokes about feeding them to lions. He calls his concubines Amazons and stages mock battles in his private garden. There's even a story that he ordered hundreds of disabled men into the arena, gave them wooden legs, and had them club each other for sport. If you're wondering what dinner conversation was like under Commodus, probably tense. His obsession with control grows darker. He executes anyone who mentions his father, Marcus Aurelius, in reverent tones, jealousy wrapped in paranoia. He orders marble statues of himself placed beside the gods, sometimes even replacing the gods' heads with his own. The temples that once echoed with prayers now echo with laughter, whispered behind closed doors. But every empire has its breaking point, and for Commodus, it comes from inside his own palace. His mistress, Marcia, overhears him drafting a list of people to be executed the next day, including herself. She does what any sensible person would, poisons his wine. When that fails, a gladiator named Narcissus finishes the job with his bare hands. The man who fancied himself Hercules dies strangled by one of his own heroes. The next morning, the Senate declares Commodus an enemy of the state, his name erased from monuments, his memory cursed. Yet, ironically, his legend survives better than most. Plays, films, even Gladiator turn him into the ultimate cautionary tale. The emperor who treated the empire like an arena and Rome like a stage. You can almost hear Marcus Aurelius sighing somewhere in the afterlife. His son, who could have been a philosopher, chose to be a performer. His empire, built on discipline, crumbled under applause. And as Rome cleans the blood from its sand, you realize something. Every generation gets the ruler it deserves. After decades of stoic emperors, Rome wanted spectacle, and Commodus gave it to them, one sword swing at a time. If Commodus turned Rome into a circus, Elagabalus turned it into a perfume-scented fever dream, half temple, half nightclub, all scandal. You arrive in the year 218 CE, and the empire is exhausted. Civil wars, assassinations, and endless proclamations of restored order have left Rome dazed. Into that chaos walks a 14-year-old boy from Syria, carrying a meteorite and calling it God. His real name is Varius Avitus Bassianus, but the world will know him as Emperor Elagabalus. He isn't like anyone Rome has ever seen. Raised in Emesa, modern-day Homs, he served as high priest of the sun god Elagabal, whose symbol, a black stone believed to have fallen from heaven, he worshipped with music, incense, and ritual dance. When the army, tired of yet another serious emperor, backs him as ruler, Rome suddenly finds itself led by a teenage priest with a flair for divine drama. From the start, Elagabalus decides Rome's traditions are optional. He replaces Jupiter, the king of Roman gods, with his own Syrian deity, building a new temple, the Elagabalium, on the Palatine Hill. He drags the sacred meteorite across the city in a golden chariot pulled by white horses, walking backward in front of it, eyes to the ground, dressed in shimmering silk. Romans, who are used to sober ceremonies in togas, stare as drums thunder and incense clouds fill the air. One senator mutters, "Jupiter has been evicted by a teenager with eyeliner." The emperor's court becomes a festival of contradictions. He fills the palace with dancers, magicians, and foreign priests. Banquets stretch into dawn, guests reclining on violet couches under ceilings that drop rose petals, sometimes so many that guests suffocate beneath them. You wonder if that's exaggeration or performance art. Either way, you can imagine Rome choking on its own luxury. Elagabalus is fascinated by transformation. He changes his clothing several times a day. First a priest's robe, then a general's armor, then silk so sheer they scandalize even the statues. He calls senators to meetings at midnight, serves dinner to slaves, and holds audiences while perfumed with frankincense and cinnamon. He seems determined to prove that the empire can run on chaos as long as it smells divine. Historians can't decide whether he was eccentric, revolutionary, or simply misunderstood. The Roman elite called him depraved. Modern scholars sometimes call him gender non-conforming. He preferred being called lady, shaved his face daily, and reportedly offered fortunes to physicians who could transform his body to match how he saw himself. In a world built on rigid hierarchies, his fluid identity was an earthquake. You might think that sounds ahead of its time, but for the senators who had just survived a century of purges, it was terrifying. They were used to emperors who killed them, not confused them. Every feast, every robe, every performance of priestly ecstasy felt like mockery of the old order. Rome, proud of its traditions, suddenly saw its emperor as a walking heresy. Still, not everyone hated him. The common people enjoyed his generosity. Gold coins tossed from balconies, public games drenched in exotic perfumes, even lotteries where the prizes ranged from villas to dead animals. One citizen supposedly opened his scroll expecting a fortune and found a snake. The emperor called it divine randomness. You can almost hear the groan echo through history. At the heart of his reign lies contradiction. His temple rituals are deeply devout, but his governance seems impulsive. He appoints dancers as magistrates, invites charioteers to Senate meetings, and proposes marrying his god to Rome's moon goddess in a state ceremony complete with fireworks, processions, and an enormous dowry. The event feels more like a musical than a wedding. The Senate, meanwhile, prays for stability. When Elagabalus demands that his meteorite god outrank Jupiter in every temple, they realize the empire has traded logic for theater. But his power comes not from politics, it's from spectacle. As long as he keeps the legions entertained and the streets perfumed, rebellion stays politely on pause. And yet, under the silk and incense, danger brews. His grandmother, Julia Maesa, the political mastermind who put him on the throne, watches nervously as her grandson alienates Rome's power base. She starts promoting her other grandson, Alexander Severus, as a sensible alternative. Elagabalus senses the plot, but underestimates how much the Praetorian Guard loves order and loathes confusion. When the guards finally rebel in 222 CE, it isn't a glorious coup. It's tired men dragging a frightened teenager through the palace halls he once turned into a temple. His mother clings to him as they are both killed, quickly, brutally. The soldiers toss their bodies into the Tiber. The perfumes, the petals, the silks, all sink into mud and silence. But something about him lingers. For centuries, Romans would whisper his name as shorthand for excess and strangeness. Yet beneath the scandal, there's a strange melancholy to his story. Maybe Elagabalus wasn't trying to mock Rome. Maybe he was just trying to remake it in his own image, to turn an empire built on conquest into one built on transformation. You can almost see the candle flicker out in his temple, the incense smoke curling into the night air. The gods of old Rome, watching from their marble pedestals, must have wondered what sort of creature they had just hosted on their throne. A madman, a prophet, or simply a boy who mistook the stage for heaven. After Elagabalus, Rome desperately craves normalcy. Laws, order, someone who wears pants at official meetings. But the empire has a bad habit of overcorrecting. If Elagabalus was all perfume and silk, the next emperor, Tiberius, is all stone and shadows. His name echoes from the early days of empire, and though his story comes before Caligula's, you find it fitting to revisit him now, because he's the mold from which every paranoid ruler afterward seems cast. You meet Tiberius in his final years, when the world calls him the Dark One of Capri. He's the stepson and reluctant heir of Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. Augustus adored control, loved spectacle, but Tiberius, he prefers distance. He's quiet, calculating, a soldier more than a statesman. While others conquer provinces, he conquers silence. And in silence, the mind turns dangerous. Early in his reign, Tiberius seems almost humble. He rules efficiently, balances the treasury, avoids unnecessary wars. Rome sighs with relief. Finally, a grown-up in charge. But then, tragedy and suspicion start chewing away at him. His son Drusus dies, possibly poisoned. Friends betray him for power. Senators flatter him with the kind of smiles that smell of fear. Eventually, he decides Rome itself is poison. So he leaves. He sails to the island of Capri, a jagged jewel of rock and sea, and never returns to the capital again. Officially, it's for health reasons. Unofficially, it's to rule from afar, unseen. Capri becomes his empire within the empire. No senate, no crowds, just cliffs, servants, and the constant hiss of the ocean below. You'd think solitude might calm him. Instead, it transforms him. When a man with absolute power loses trust in others, he starts inventing new amusements. And the rumors about Tiberius's amusements still echo like waves hitting the shore. Ancient gossip paints Capri as a private theater of indulgence, a place where loyalty was tested through humiliation, where cruelty hid behind luxury. Even the historians, who loved a good scandal, seem half scared of describing him. Suetonius writes that no one ever left Capri unchanged. Tacitus calls him a man whose pleasures turned into punishments. But sift through the exaggerations, and you find something darker than mere vice. An emperor trapped in his own labyrinth of suspicion. He installs networks of spies to monitor Rome from afar. Senators who speak too freely vanish. Letters of accusation pile up like kindling, each one fueling another execution. It's as if he's still fighting invisible wars, but the battlefield is the human soul. You wonder whether he even knows the difference anymore. Meanwhile, the empire runs itself. Taxes collected, legions drilled, roads repaired. Ordinary citizens live their lives, unaware that their emperor now communicates only through coded notes and trembling messengers. He signs orders for death, with the same detachment he once reserved for military reports. Capri's cliffs become a metaphor, majestic, distant, and deadly. And yet, the man himself is strangely pitiful. He never sought the throne. Augustus forced it on him. He spent his youth in the shadow of greater men. Julius Caesar's heirs, heroic generals, and golden heirs who died too young. Power, to Tiberius, was never a crown. It was a chain. You can feel that resentment simmering beneath his cold precision. There's an eerie scene described by ancient writers. Tiberius, now in his 70s, walking barefoot along the edge of the cliffs, muttering to himself about loyalty, destiny, and betrayal. Servants follow at a cautious distance. Below him, the Mediterranean sparkles, a blue so calm it looks like mercy itself. He pauses, staring at it for a long time, as if deciding whether to jump or rule another day. Sometimes you wonder whether the horror stories about him, those whispered tales of excess, are just Rome's way of punishing introversion. An emperor who doesn't attend games, who doesn't flatter senators, who prefers solitude. In a culture built on spectacle, that's practically a crime. Rome couldn't handle a ruler who didn't crave applause, so it invented a monster instead. But monsters, once named, become real. The Senate begins to hate him, the Praetorian Guard to fear him, and Caligula, his great-nephew, starts waiting in the wings, learning exactly what fear can do to a man with a crown. The cycle of madness is already preparing its next act. Tiberius dies quietly in 37 CE, on a villa bed overlooking the sea. Some say he was smothered with a pillow by Caligula himself. Others claim his heart simply stopped. When word reaches Rome, the people erupt in celebration, shouting, "To the Tiber with Tiberius!" The irony is cruel. He had already thrown himself there, metaphorically, years before. The empire moves on, but the shadow of Capri lingers. Even now, when you visit that island, the locals still point to the ruins and whisper, "That's where the emperor hid his sins." Maybe they're right. Or maybe it's where he hid his loneliness. Either way, the waves keep rolling in, erasing footprints, washing secrets clean, just as they've done for every ruler who ever thought isolation was the same thing as safety. And as the sea sighs below those cliffs, You can almost hear the echo of his reign, a warning that power doesn't need noise to corrupt. Sometimes it just needs silence. By now, you start noticing a pattern. Rome's emperors always swing between too much chaos and too much control, like a pendulum made of marble and blood. After Tiberius's cold retreat and Elagabalus's perfume carnival, the empire lands on someone who combines both extremes. Domitian, a man who loved order so much, he strangled joy just to keep it neat. He's not born into madness. In fact, at first glance, he looks like a reformer, an administrator who actually reads the reports he signs. When he inherits the throne in 81 CE, Rome is still recovering from Nero's artistic disaster and the civil wars that followed. Domitian promises discipline, morality, and justice. He rebuilds temples, repairs roads, and tightens the treasury. You might almost like him if you met him on day one. But good intentions in Rome age faster than statues in acid rain. Domitian believes the empire's sickness comes from too much freedom. So he prescribes order. Strict, beautiful, absolute order. He bans the castration of slaves, limits lavish spending, and revives old ceremonies. At first, the Senate applauds. Then he adds something new: inspections. Suddenly, senators find imperial spies in their kitchens, their gardens, even their favorite bathhouses. You could say Domitian invented the Roman version of CCTV surveillance, minus the cameras plus the decapitations. He enjoys rituals, especially of fear. Each morning, he walks through his palace halls, lined with mirrors, so polished he can see anyone approaching. He calls it security. Others call it paranoia, with good interior design. If a servant startles him, that servant disappears. If a senator coughs at the wrong time, the Senate floor gets new decorations. It's all about control of the body, the word, the air itself. You picture him pacing at night, alone with the flicker of oil lamps, muttering that Rome loves its rulers only when they're dead. He's right, but that doesn't make him easier to love alive. And like so many emperors before him, fear breeds fascination. The same Domitian who bans excess also enjoys peculiar pleasures behind closed doors. Suetonius, the historian, swears he had a private chamber lined with mirrors, where he'd invite guests to dine and watch themselves reflect endlessly, so that nothing sinful could hide. You're not sure if that's philosophy or voyeurism, but it's very on brand for a man who never trusted anyone's skin, not even his own. His cruelty is methodical, almost bureaucratic. He revives treason trials, executing men for small offenses, like making jokes about him in taverns. One poet, Lucan, once dared to compare him to Nero. Domitian made sure the comparison ended with silence. Publicly, he calls it the restoration of morality. Privately, it's revenge, disguised as reform. Still, you can't deny the competence. The borders are secure, the economy stable, and the game spectacular. When he presides over the Colosseum, he sits under a gilded canopy engraved with constellations, his name among the stars. He even refers to himself as Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. The Senate politely echoes the title, but you can almost hear their teeth grinding. One thing you learn from Rome's history: when an emperor starts calling himself divine, his expiration date is already printed. The people, meanwhile, admire his efficiency. Grain ships arrive on time. Roads gleam. Taxes are fair, if heavy. To the average Roman, Domitian looks like a god who actually does his paperwork. To the Senate, he's a nightmare in polished sandals. Every law he passes feels like a chain. Every praise feels like surveillance. He's also obsessed with punishment that feels symbolic. When a treasurer once mishandled state funds, Domitian didn't just execute him. He had his hands cut off first. When an actor mocked him on stage, Domitian banned all comedy for a year. You could call him the first Roman censor if the word didn't already mean someone who burns everything interesting. And yet, amid all this darkness, there's something strangely human about him. He writes poetry. He gardens. He keeps bees. He even hosts quiet dinners where he asks guests philosophical questions like, "What would you do if you ruled the world?" The trick is that there's only one right answer. Exactly what you're doing, Caesar. It's easy to hate him from afar, but imagine the pressure. Living every second knowing that your father and brother, both previous emperors, are still being compared to you. That your family name carries both glory and scandal. Maybe Domitian's paranoia isn't madness. Maybe it's inheritance. Still, history doesn't forgive perfectionists. When you rule by fear, loyalty becomes performance. Even his wife Domitia grows weary of his constant suspicion. By 96 CE, the whispers grow louder. The emperor's time is near. His closest advisors, men who once swore eternal allegiance, start rehearsing betrayal. The end is theatrical, as Rome demands. One morning, a freedman named Stephanus, pretending to deliver documents, hides a dagger beneath his scrolls. Domitian reads, frowns, and looks up just as the blade strikes. He fights back, kills one attacker, wounds another, but finally collapses beneath the marble where he once demanded his titles carved. The Senate celebrates quietly. The people mourn loudly. History, as usual, takes both sides. Some call him tyrant, others savior. You just call him predictable. Because in Rome, the line between protector and oppressor is thinner than a papyrus sheet. And as the candles in his hall burn down to ash, you realize that Domitian's reign wasn't about perversion of flesh. It was the perversion of control. Not the lust for pleasure, but the lust for order so absolute that even love couldn't breathe in it. Rome had seen madness, vanity, and cruelty. But nothing prepared it for an emperor whose greatest enemy was his own brother. You open your eyes to the reign of Caracalla, a man who grew up in palaces but lived like he was perpetually marching into battle. His full name, Marcus Aurelius Severus Antoninus, sounds noble enough, but history remembers him simply as Caracalla, named after a Gallic cloak he popularized. It's fitting. The man who ruled the largest empire on earth will be forever known for his fashion choice. Born to Emperor Septimius Severus and the fierce Empress Julia Domna, Caracalla was raised in luxury, yet taught to worship war. His father drilled into him a single creed: fear keeps Rome strong. Unfortunately, Caracalla took that lesson to heart and treated it like scripture. He and his younger brother, Geta, were meant to share the throne after their father's death in 211 CE. Rome expected two co-emperors working in harmony. Rome, of course, was wrong. Even as children, the brothers couldn't stand each other. They divided the palace into invisible borders like squabbling landlords. Caracalla's guards patrolled one side, Geta's another. Their mother had to schedule separate dinners to keep them from drawing swords over soup. When their father died in Britain, his last words were supposedly, "Be good to each other." You can almost hear history laughing. The joint rule lasted less than a year. One afternoon, Caracalla invited Geta to a reconciliation meeting in their mother's private chamber. As Julia Domna watched, soldiers burst in and cut Geta down in her arms. The marble floors of the imperial palace turned red while Caracalla declared himself sole emperor. The Senate, as usual, applauded through clenched teeth. From that day on, he ruled like a man haunted by the ghost of his brother. He ordered Geta's memory erased, statues smashed, names chiseled from inscriptions, faces scraped off coins. Even private citizens caught mentioning Geta were executed for treason against unity. It's called damnatio memoriae, the Roman art of pretending someone never existed. You could say Caracalla invented the ancient version of the block button, except his version came with swords. He cloaked his guilt in ambition. Determined to prove himself a soldier's emperor, Caracalla marched constantly through Gaul, Germania, Mesopotamia, sleeping in tents, eating with his troops, and paying them handsomely. The soldiers adored him. The Senate despised him. He once declared that senators were the real enemies of Rome and considered replacing them with army officers. It wasn't diplomacy, but it was certainly honest. In 212 CE, he issued one of the most sweeping decrees in history, the Constitutio Antoniniana, granting Roman citizenship to all free men across the empire. It sounded generous, Rome for everyone, but the motivation was pure math. More citizens meant more taxes, and Caracalla needed money for his endless wars. Still, the gesture changed the empire forever. For the first time, a farmer in Syria or a merchant in Gaul could legally call himself Roman. You wonder if Geta would have approved. Caracalla also had a curious fascination with Alexander the Great. He dressed like him, prayed at his tomb in Alexandria, and carried portraits of himself styled as the Macedonian conqueror. Some nights, he'd summon philosophers to debate whether he surpassed Alexander. If anyone said no, that philosopher mysteriously vanished by morning. You get the feeling Caracalla's dinner parties were short on conversation. His most enduring monument still stands today, the Baths of Caracalla. Massive, ornate, filled with mosaics and marble, they could hold thousands at once. There were heated pools, gyms, gardens, libraries, a public paradise built by a man who trusted no one. Maybe it was his way of buying back the city's affection. Or maybe he just liked the idea of being remembered for something cleaner than murder. Yet beneath the grandeur, paranoia kept gnawing. He saw Geta's face in every shadow, betrayal in every whisper. He executed friends, advisors, even his wife. He once ordered an entire village in Alexandria massacred because someone made a joke about his brother's death. The story goes, he locked the city gates and let his soldiers discipline the population. When the blood dried, he declared the matter settled. By 217 CE, his empire stretched from Scotland to Iraq. But inside, it was hollow, like marble eaten away by worms. He spent more time consulting oracles than ministers, asking if Geta's spirit still followed him. Maybe it did. His end comes quietly, almost absurdly. While traveling through Mesopotamia, he stops by the roadside to relieve himself. Emperors, it turns out, are human that way. His bodyguard, a man named Martialis, approaches and stabs him in the ribs. No conspiracy, no Senate coup, just one tired soldier, avenging a brother he lost to one of Caracalla's random executions. The Emperor of Rome collapses on dusty ground, armor gleaming under the desert sun, muttering that he still hears Geta's voice. Back in Rome, the Senate barely hides its relief. They declare a festival of thanksgiving. Julia Domna, his mother, locks herself away and starves to death, the final casualty of her son's war. And the empire moves on, pretending once again that blood is just another kind of tax. When you walk through the ruins of Caracalla's baths today, you still feel it. The grandeur, the guilt, the echo of a man trying to wash away a murder no river could cleanse. The mosaics shimmer faintly in the sunlight, and for a moment you almost imagine two brothers there, laughing again, before history remembers to interrupt. By now, you've seen emperors who prayed like gods, fought like gladiators, and ruled like performers. But here comes one who eats like a nation. Vitellius doesn't burn Rome, doesn't crown his horse, doesn't talk to the moon. He simply sits down to dinner and never gets back up, metaphorically speaking. His reign lasts less than a year, but somehow he manages to feast his way into infamy. It begins in 69 CE, the year of the four emperors, when the empire plays musical thrones. After Nero's suicide, Rome can't agree on who's in charge. The legions in Spain support Galba. Those in the east support Otho. The German legions, not to be outdone, shout, "Vitellius!" A general known less for strategy and more for his appetite. He's a big man with small ambitions, and his soldiers love him because he drinks with them, calls them brothers, and forgets their crimes as easily as he forgets his debts. When his troops march toward Rome, they pillage everything in their path. Vitellius doesn't stop them. He simply joins the parade, eating and laughing along the way. By the time he enters the city, he's emperor by default. And what does he do with the world's most powerful empire? He throws a banquet that could feed a province. You can almost see it. Marble tables groaning under the weight of roasted peacocks, flamingo tongues, dormice stuffed with nuts and honey. He imports fish from the Atlantic, figs from Africa, and oysters from Britain, just to prove that the empire itself is his buffet. Ancient writers claim he sometimes ate 4 meals a day, punctuated by snacks of boar and pastry swans. His favorite dish? A stew he called the Shield of Minerva, made from the livers of pike, brains of pheasants, tongues of flamingos, and intestines of lampreys, all drowned in rare wine. If cholesterol had a patron saint, it would be Vitellius. His decadence goes beyond food. He adores costume parties, dressing as priests, generals, and gods, often all in one evening. He once ordered his entire household to wear matching gold-threaded robes for a dinner dedicated to himself. He even renamed one of the palace kitchens the Fort of Intestines. Rome, meanwhile, teeters on collapse. Armies fight for control. Grain shipments stall, and citizens whisper that while the empire starves, its emperor feasts. But Vitellius isn't purely monster. He's a man who mistakes comfort for control. He loves Rome the way a drunk man loves wine, passionately, destructively, without understanding when to stop. He pays debts out of the treasury to win favor, doubles soldiers' salaries, and throws games so extravagant that the lions seem better fed than the people. He calls it generosity. The Senate calls it bankruptcy. Rumors of his excess spread quickly. One story says he held a dinner for 30,000 guests. Another that he built a special wagon just to carry sauces. Whether true or not, Rome believes them, because every empire secretly loves to hate its own gluttons. Vitellius becomes a symbol, a living warning that abundance can rot faster than bread. Still, you can't help but feel a flicker of pity. He isn't cruel like Caligula, or paranoid like Domitian. He's just soft, too soft for a world carved by iron. When a rival general, Vespasian, declares himself emperor, Vitellius barely reacts. He's in the middle of a feast when the news arrives. He sighs, wipes his fingers, and mutters, "Let them come." Maybe he thinks he can charm his enemies with hospitality. Maybe he's just too tired to fight. As Vespasian's legions approach, the mood in Rome turns grim. Streets empty, markets close, and Vitellius paces the palace like a man who misplaced his appetite. He tries to abdicate, offering to retire quietly and live as a private citizen. But power doesn't let go so gently. His supporters beg him to resist. His enemies surround the city. The final scene unfolds like a tragic comedy. Vitellius flees through the palace's back corridors, disguised as a servant, hiding in a dog kennel. Soldiers drag him out by his hair, mocking his girth and his silk slippers. Even in death, Rome treats him like a farce. They haul him to the Forum, jeering before killing him at the Gemonian stairs, the same spot where other disgraced men had bled before. His body is thrown into the Tiber, joining the empire's long tradition of washing away regret downstream. It's easy to laugh at him, the emperor who dined while the empire starved. But beneath the ridicule lies a mirror. Vitellius didn't invent Roman decadence, he just embodied it too literally. He was the hangover after a century of excess. The empire's appetite finally turned inward. When you visit the ruins of his banquet halls today, you can almost smell the ghost of roasting meat and spilled wine. The marble floors are cracked, the frescoes faded, but the silence feels heavy, as if even the air remembers being full. Vitellius teaches Rome, and maybe you, that indulgence doesn't start as sin. It starts as comfort, then becomes habit, then identity. And by the time you realize the meal has gone too long, the table's already empty, and the empire's already starving. History rarely gives second chances, but Rome loves a rerun, especially when it comes wrapped in silk and controversy. So after the brief, greasy spectacle of Vitellius, the empire once again finds itself haunted by a familiar perfume. Elagabalus may have been tossed into the Tiber years ago, but the rumor of him lingers like incense in the halls of power. And out of that fragrance steps another echo of his defiance, a reminder that decadence, like history, never truly dies. You wander through late imperial Rome, centuries after Augustus dreamed of marble order. The empire is older now, heavier, cracked by its own weight. Yet even in decline, it still loves its showmen. And there are few figures who capture that mix of scandal and spectacle quite like Heliogabalus reimagined. An emperor whose story becomes myth, whose myth becomes symbol, and whose symbol refuses to fade. By the 4th century, Roman writers can't stop retelling his story. They call him monster, priest, goddess, rebel. They whisper that he was both tragedy and prophecy, that his reign had predicted the empire's obsession with itself. You can almost hear them arguing through time. Was he perverted or merely honest in a world built on hypocrisy? Because, let's be fair, Rome's moral code has always been a costume. The same senators who scolded Elagabalus for his silks secretly hosted their own private banquets. The same historians who called him impure celebrated emperors who burned cities, poisoned kin, or bathed in the blood of enemies. Maybe Elagabalus wasn't the first to sin. Maybe he was just the first to make sin look fabulous. The legacy of his rebellion survives not through bloodlines, but through rumor. Plays and poems, centuries later, paint him as a warning against vanity and softness. But you can sense something else hiding under those layers of moral outrage, fascination. The empire that once spat him out can't stop looking back at him. Even Christian chroniclers, eager to condemn the pagan past, can't resist describing his perfumed madness in detail. They hate him the way Rome always hates what it secretly envies. In a way, his ghost becomes a template for how later emperors and kings will be remembered, as cautionary tales more than men. Louis XIV's Versailles. You can almost smell the same jasmine-soaked air as Elagabalus's temple. The decadent courts of Renaissance Italy. Same theater, just with better chandeliers. Even modern rulers who build palaces of gold and call it divine destiny. Each of them is walking his marble path. When historians try to reconstruct him, they realize most of what they know is rumor built on rumor. He's less a person than a collage of accusation. The boy priest who married a god, who dressed as a goddess, who forced senators to dance to Syrian drums, who fed guests until they suffocated under roses. Maybe half of it's fiction, but fiction says more about the storyteller than the subject. Rome couldn't handle an emperor who didn't fit into its categories: man or woman, soldier or priest, ruler or performer. So it turned him into a myth that could be safely condemned and endlessly retold. You imagine him now, centuries later, standing on some forgotten stage of memory, adjusting his crown of gems and saying, "You'll talk about me anyway." And he's right. The same empire that tried to erase him carved him into eternity through scandal. If you walk through the ruins of his temple, the Elagabalium, you'll find nothing but stones and silence. The black meteorite he worshipped as a god is long gone, either melted into legend or lost to looters. But the architecture still whispers of a time when the world's mightiest city bowed before a foreign god because one teenager told it to. The sun once rose from that hill in a blaze of gold. Now it sets behind crumbling walls. Yet the air feels charged, as if still waiting for music to start. And that's the irony. While his contemporaries mocked his sensuality, Rome's later rulers would adopt it as art. The baths of Diocletian, the mosaics of Constantine's palaces, even the elaborate rituals of Byzantine emperors, all bear traces of that Eastern extravagance, first condemned under his name. What was once scandal became style. What was once heresy became heritage. It makes you wonder, who really won? The senators who tore him down, or the spirit that still decorates every corner of Western luxury? The man who died in the Tiber, or the myth that still glitters in marble centuries later? By the time the empire splits into East and West, Elagabalus is long gone, but his ghost lingers in every court that mistakes beauty for weakness, every ruler who uses spectacle as a shield, every society that condemns what it secretly desires. He's not just a person anymore. He's a warning, a mirror, a perfume that clings even after the bottle's been smashed. And as you drift through those ruins, the scent of roses and smoke still faint in the air, you realize Rome never stopped worshiping him. It just changed the altar. Power always begins as a dream and ends as a reflection. And when Rome finally looked in the mirror, it didn't see gods or emperors. It saw itself, drunk on beauty, blinded by desire, and afraid of silence. You stand now at the empire's twilight. The marble gleam has dulled, the temples crumble, and the Colosseum's echoes sound less like applause and more like ghosts clearing their throats. Centuries of emperors, mad, magnificent, tragic, have come and gone, each convinced he could outshine the last. But strip away the gold leaf, and all their perversions start to look less like sickness and more like symptoms of something larger, the hunger that comes from being obeyed too often. When Caligula crowned himself divine, the Senate called it insanity. When Nero sang while Rome burned, they called it vanity. When Commodus strutted through the arena, they called it depravity. But what if all of them were simply mirrors, each reflecting the empire's own craving for spectacle, its love of control dressed up as religion? Every citizen cheering, every senator flattering, every poet exaggerating, they all kept the theater running. The emperors were the headline acts, but the audience never left. You imagine walking through Rome after sunset, long after the emperors have turned to dust. The statues still stand, cracked but proud. The same gods still stare from the same pedestals, though no one prays to them anymore. The old palaces smell of rain and moss. Maybe, if you listen closely, you can still hear Caligula laughing somewhere in the Forum, or Nero humming from the ruins of his golden house. Their stories linger, not because they were monstrous, but because they were human, just magnified by marble and power. And that's the strange, uncomfortable truth. Rome's perversion wasn't lust or madness. It was loneliness. Power isolates. It feeds on worship. And the moment no one says no, reality dissolves. Each emperor, in his own way, tried to fill that void with art, cruelty, faith, food, ritual, or self-invention. They weren't just rulers. They were addicts of attention. Sound familiar? You scroll through your screen, seeing influencers chasing followers, billionaires building private islands, politicians naming buildings after themselves. 2,000 years later, the thrones are digital, but the hunger is the same. Of course, the Romans didn't think of it that way. To them, these emperors were cautionary tales. How power corrupts, how luxury destroys. But maybe they missed the point. Maybe decadence wasn't Rome's disease, but its confession. In a world that worshipped control, the so-called perverted emperors were just honest enough to stop pretending. They wore their excesses in public. They lived their contradictions out loud. In history, ever the gossip took notes. You pass the ruins of the baths of Caracalla, now open to the sky. Grass grows between the mosaics. Birds nest in what used to be marble vaults. The echo of laughter still hums faintly, as if a feast just ended. A few tourists wander, whispering about acoustics and symmetry, unaware that this place was once a sanctuary for an emperor who murdered his brother and still built beauty that outlived him. That's Rome's trick. It forgives through architecture. Nearby, the Palatine Hill glows orange in the evening sun. The remains of the imperial palace stretch like ribs of a giant creature, half buried, half awake. You remember Tiberius hiding on Capri, Elagabalus throwing petals from the ceiling, Vitellius dying in the gutter, and Domitian counting reflections to see who might stab him next. Different men, same ending, each destroyed by the echo of his own name. Even the Christian emperors who came later weren't immune. They swapped temples for churches, replaced incense with hymns, but the structure of worship stayed the same. One man standing above, promising salvation while craving immortality. The costumes changed. The play didn't. You stop at the Forum, where every stone once carried orders, executions, parades, prayers. It's quiet now, just wind, pigeons, and tourists checking maps. In that silence, the stories settle. Caligula's laughter fades. Nero's song drifts away. The drums of Elagabalus go still. And for the first time, you can hear the city breathe on its own, free of masters. There's something peaceful about it, almost tender. Rome has finally outlived its emperors, their appetites, their golden statues. The city doesn't need gods anymore. It just needs morning light, olive trees, and people who remember. And as night falls, you walk past the Tiber, where so many imperial secrets ended up. The water glows faintly under the lamps. It's easy to imagine the river whispering the same lullaby it's sung for 2 millennia. Everything powerful eventually softens. Everything feared eventually becomes a story. So you breathe in that Roman air, dust, basil, rain on stone, and let the empire's ghosts settle around you. Not as monsters, but as reminders. Power ends, beauty fades, stories endure. Now close your eyes. The torches dim, the marble fades, the gods